I just played Chaos Head Noah and Chaos Child back to back. Let's talk about them. For the uninitiated, Chaos Head Noah and Chaos Child are two interconnected visual novels in the science adventure series. The most famous of the science adventure series is Steins Gate, and like most people, the anime adaptation was my first exposure to the series. I'm not going to spend ages on the background because I assume most people who click on this video will have played the games, and to be honest, I have a lot to say and want to get straight to it. Long story short, these two visual novels are set in the same universe, and although Chaos Child isn't a direct sequel to Chaos Head, it's a thematic one, expanding on the lore, world, and established powers of the first game throughout. Now, the Chaos duology, as I'm going to call it, has been sitting in my Steam backlog for over a year. The main reason I didn't play these games sooner is because of the mixed reception Chaos Head Noah seems to have online. The general consensus from a cursory glance at Reddit or other websites is that Chaos Child is a better, more complete game than Chaos Head. As such, I went in with the preconception that I was basically playing the first game in order to get to the second one, which didn't make the prospect feel very appealing. But, if there's one thing these games have taught me, it's that I shouldn't listen to a goddamn word of what people say on the internet. This comes with a lot of caveats, which don't worry, I'll get into. But in the most general sense, I absolutely love these visual novels. I'm not sure I'd call either Chaos Head or Chaos Child one of my favourites. Hell, I'm not sure if either of them even crack my top 5. But throughout, they made me laugh, cry, and think, sometimes all at the same time, and there's not much more I can ask from a story than that. In this video essay, I'm going to try and separate the truth from the delusion, not only reviewing these two games, but reaching an answer about which is better. Comparing these games is a fascinating exercise, not only because they're connected, but because they're such wonderful mirror images of each other. Chaos Child was very much written as a meditation on the first game in the series. However, this does not mean that Chaos Child is necessarily better than Chaos Head. These games have very defined weaknesses and very defined strengths. Even more puzzling is the simultaneous growth and progression between games. Aspects that were the strength of Chaos Head Noah are suddenly the weakness in Chaos Child, and likewise. The best way to go about this, as far as I can see, is to explore and discuss the 6 major elements that I find most interesting about these visual novels: the main characters, the side routes, the plot twists, the villains, and the true endings. At the end of each section, I'll come to a conclusion about which game handled each element better, and by the end of the video, say which I think is the stronger game overall. Let's kick off with a general overview of the tone and style of each game. These visual novels might be connected, but the genre changes between titles. Chaos Head is more of an outright horror story than its sequel, taking influence from Cronenberg-esque body horror and, more importantly, from the Denpa subgenre, a style of Japanese horror that, at least in the visual novel medium, relies on a main character slowly losing his grip on reality. Chaos Child is more of a psychological thriller, taking cues from the best murder mysteries in a way that its predecessor tried to do but never quite managed. In terms of atmosphere, Chaos Head beats Chaos Child hands down, in my opinion. The first game grabbed hold of me from the very first moment and never let me go. The sense of paranoia, of hopelessness, of despair, all combined to keep me on the edge of my seat throughout. Takemi's panic and uncertainty are very much reflected in the reader. That's not to say that Chaos Child is a slouch in the atmosphere department, it's just much more of a slow burn. What it lacks in plot momentum it makes up for with careful build-up. Takashi Abo's soundtrack is improved in Chaos Child. The OSTs and BGMs from that game stayed with me much more than the ones in Chaos Head. Both of these games do have something of a tonal clash problem. The horror and thriller aspects often chime uneasily with the story's shonen elements, like the D-Swords and Gigalomaniac fight scenes. Let's face it, as entertaining as the D-Swords can be, they are pretty silly. It takes things a little too close to Kanoku Nasu territory than they need to be. As a big fan of horror, my subjective opinion is that I prefer the style, atmosphere, and approach of the first game, but I also love detective thrillers and mystery fiction, so I won't hold up the genre of these visual novels as a reason for one being better than the other. They're part of the same series and universe, but they each have their own unique style, feel, and identity, which is something to be applauded. Also, from here out, this video is going to be discussing the game's characters and plots in depth, so stop here if you don't want to be spoiled. Hope you enjoy the video. The main characters are Chaos Head and Chaos Child and Shijo Takemi and Miyashiro Takeru. We'll start with Takemi, since he was the first protagonist of the series, and also since a lot of what makes Takeru interesting is how he differs to his predecessor. One of the main complaints you'll see in reviews of Chaos Head is that the Shijo Takemi is not a very likeable character. Anyone who says this is completely missing the point. This links to a general complaint I have with the way people consume fiction, particularly popular fiction. There's far too much of an emphasis on the main character of a story being likeable. This approach is often reductive not only to the narrative, but to the intelligence of the audience. Chaos Head is upfront about the fact that you're not supposed to like Nishijo Takumi. I don't know how anyone who read more than 5 minutes of this visual novel could think he was praiseworthy in any way, shape or form. The whole point of Chaos Head is to critique and tear down the main character's worldview. Nishijo is a character that shirks and hides from reality, preferring the world created by his own delusions. He lives in a storage container on the top of a building, for goodness sake. We're not supposed to find him likeable. He pushes away everyone and anyone close to him, such as his sister Nanami, preferring the idea of a person rather than a person themselves. He has fantasies of reaching out to others, but these fantasies are entirely performative, and he blames the rest of the world for his isolation as a defense mechanism. Takeru's character arc ties into the main theme of the game. If you live in a world of delusion, are you even real yourself? Through the horrors of the New Gen murders, Takumi learns the hard way that you can only run from reality for so long. Whether you like it or not, the horrors and cold truths of the real world will find you. They might even kill you. Reality, the blue sky, lies in the connections he finds with others, not in the cold metal ceiling of a storage container. Nishijo's arc is very clearly defined and essential to the main theme of Chaos Head, the blurred line between reality and delusion. The same is true of Miyashiro Takeru in Chaos Child, but his grappling with the conflict between reality and delusion is very different in nature. Like the Taku who came before him, Miyashiro is not a very endearing character. He's more palatable than Takumi on the surface level, but that's all it is, surface level. Inside, he's just as flawed, perhaps even more so, than the perverted Otaku who came before him. It also builds into a theme that was relevant in Chaos Head, but given much more attention in Chaos Child: the effects of trauma, and the way delusion springs up as a coping mechanism. Takumi's greatest vice is his attempts to escape from reality. Takeru's greatest vice is his insistence on affirming his own reality. This is reflected in the key notion of being a right-sider and wrong-sider. Takeru sees his ability to pass and discern information not only as evidence of his own existence, but evidence of his superiority over others. The intention is clear in making the protagonist of Chaos Child an admiring observer of the new generation murders in Chaos Head. Takeru is in many ways the embodiment of the At-Channel observers who misinterpreted the initial new gen murders, glorifying Nishijo Takumi into some kind of hero, when in the character's own words, he's nothing but a monster. The ultimate tragedy of Takeru is his insecurity in being one of the crowd. Deep down, he really does think he's better than everyone else, without knowing that he's the biggest wrong-sider of them all, surrounded by a series of delusions, lies and pretenses that he accepts without question. The evolution from Nishijo Takumi to Miyashiro Takeru reflects the thematic evolution of the series from Chaos Head to Chaos Child, from accepting your own reality in the first game, no matter how harsh, to questioning and perhaps even rising above your own reality in the second. If I had to make a judgment about which main character is stronger, and this really is a tough one, I'd have to say Miyashiro Takeru overall. I think there's a subtlety and nuance to be found in Takeru's character arc, even if Takumi's journey is better defined. The protagonist of the second game is a more believable character, more grounded, and more relevant to the present day. He reflects how the themes of Chaos Head and Chaos Child have only become more timely in 2025. The real issue in the modern day isn't those who flee from reality, like Takumi. It's those who believe in their own importance, their own facts, their own reality, without questioning for a moment whether they could be wrong, like Takeru. In this element, I'll give the edge to Chaos Child. Both the visual novels in the Chaos duology follow the same structure. A long common route is followed by several individual side routes, which focus in on a particular heroine. Both games require you to see all of the side route endings before unlocking the true ending. I was disappointed to find that Chaos Child kept this structure from the first game, because it was definitely one of the weaker aspects of Chaos Head Noah. None of the side routes in Chaos Head were anywhere near as satisfying as the common or true routes, and honestly could have been skipped over entirely without too much detriment to the whole experience. Chaos Child has a similar pitfall. Most of the side routes in the second game also feel unnecessary, even if they are of a higher standard than the first game. There is one very notable exception to this, which I'll get to, but first let's discuss why the side routes are a weakness in both of these visual novels. The main issue that the side routes in Chaos Head have is how self-contained they are. Most of them could probably be extracted from the story without any real consequence. They succeed in developing the heroines they focus on for the most part, but don't do much else. Yua's route, for example, is a complete mess, and the less said about the Siscon-heavy Nanami route the better. I didn't really care for Kazui's arc either, and although Ayase's is of a much higher quality than the previous theme mentioned, it still doesn't really feel vital to the story. The pick of the bunch in Chaos Head is clearly Aoi's route. Not only does her character have the most depth of the side heroines, aided by a bone-chilling backstory about the human experimentation on her mother, but it also raises the entertaining prospect of the whole science adventure series being a simulation, lorded over by the committee. As fun as I find this notion, the route neither outright confirms nor denies it, so I won't spend too long discussing something that the series leaves as ambiguous and doesn't really expand on in Chaos Child either. Regardless, Aoi's section may be lively and engaging, but it still pales in comparison to the visceral impact of the game's common and true endings. Chaos Child fares much better in the execution of its side routes. There's nothing in the second game of the same poor quality as Yua's route. Having said that, Aramura's section was underwhelming for me. I felt that it squandered the dramatic potential of her psychic ability to tell whether a person is lying. All of the big moments, such as Aramura realizing Takaru was also lying to her, seemed obvious and heavy-handed, while the dark conclusion made it all feel a little pointless. Uki's route certainly ties into the main themes of the game, such as the contrast between a happy delusion and a traumatizing reality, but never really managed to engage me on an emotional level. They would have needed to develop the character of Uki and her relationship with Takaru much earlier and much more for it to have any real impact. Kazuki's route, on the other hand, leaves a bigger impression. Do I think it's actually necessary for the story? Not really, no. But Kazuki's giglomaniac power of voicing uncontrollable delusions is one of the most creative in the games, and leads to some wacky but enjoyable imagery of Iso monsters roaming Shibuya. The callbacks to Chaos Head are probably the biggest reason why I enjoyed this section, but it still amounted to little more than an entertaining side quest. But then, just as I was ready to write off the side route structure as a failure in both of these visual novels, I got to Kurisu's route. It's time to bust out the Scorsese meme. This arc is absolute cinema. Not only is this the best of any heroine route in either game, it's probably my favourite part of the whole duology. I'll cover the revelation regarding Kurisu more in the plot twist section of this video, but let it be known that Chaos Child's side routes are better than Chaos Head's purely because of Kurisu's arc. For me, this segment captures everything I enjoyed about the Chaos games. Sharp, surprising, emotional, gripping, and thought-provoking. It may only be a few days after I finish Chaos Child, but this is the part of the series that's sticking with me the most. Needless to say, Chaos Child is the clear pick for which visual novel better handles its side routes, even if I think this structuring technique hasn't aged well in both, and leads to an awful lot of tedious skipping. The Chaos duology lives and dies by its plot twists. Now I must admit that I'm not a reader who usually likes plot twists, the main reason being that 90% of them end up feeling like a gimmick to me, something the author is in search of a shock value, without any real thematic substance. If we exclude detective fiction, where narrative surprises are established and expected, I generally feel that the majority of twists fail to justify their own existence and often ruin the reread or rewatchability of a book, film, or game. So coming from a reader with a skeptical view of this storytelling technique, the following is high praise. Chaos Head and Chaos Child have some fantastic twists. On the other hand, they also have some really annoying ones, which sometimes undermine the very foundations of the story they're in. We'll start with the good twists in Chaos Head. The revelation that Takumi himself was created by the delusions of the real Nishujo Takumi is pure genius. This concept serves as the basis for the protagonist's character arc, and is a great example of a twist that succeeds because of its thematic relevance. Nothing about this reveal is forced or gimmicky, rather it's fair, frightening, and inevitable. It succeeds because they spent hours setting it up, placing clues, laying the framework, justifying the inclusion. Less successful is the twist in Yua's route, namely that she is not actually Yua, but her sister Mia. This whole concept is introduced and then concluded too fast. I found it impossible to really care whether she was Mia or Yua because of how little it affected the main plot. Then there's the twists in regard to the real New Gen murder culprits, Detective Suwa and the nurse Hazuki. I quite enjoyed these revelations the first time I read them, even if they have some shaky underpinnings. First of all, the game gives away that Suwa is evil in the scene where he says that he likes Darth Spider, so this particular surprise didn't really end up being a surprise. The nurse being grim, however, did surprise me, but it doesn't provide much more than superficial shock value. Chaos Head makes so little effort to develop these two characters that I'm willing to call them the weakest antagonists of the duology, something which I explain more in the villains section. Nonetheless, they get the important twist in Chaos Head about Nishijo Takumi absolutely spot on, and the less successful ones are either not bad enough or not important enough to affect my enjoyment of the overall story. The twists in Chaos Child are even more of a mixed bag. On the one hand, this visual novel has some of the best twists that I've read in a long time, but it also has ones that made me want to tear my hair out. The main big reveal of the common route is that Serika is the one behind the return of the New Gen murders. I'll be honest, I guess that Serica was suspicious from the moment she showed up at the Love Hotel in Chapter 1, but the common route still had enough misdirection and red herrings to make this twist very satisfying when it landed. Looking back, the fact she has a Gero Froggy strap was a massive hint that I should have read more into, but still, this is an effective surprise that ties well into Takeru's character arc, and forces him to confront just how much of a wrong-sider he really is. I also love how this twist develops ideas from the first game, not only taking the Frankenstein's delusion concept to its logical conclusion, but fixing the issue of the twist villains and Chaos Head not having any real development or connection to the protagonist. Having said all that, Serica's identity as the culprit isn't even the best twist in Chaos Child. That title has to go to the shock of Kurisu Nono being Minamisawa Senri. This twist is masterful. I consider myself to be pretty damn good at guessing the direction of a plot. Like I said, I guessed that Serica was suspicious very early on, but for whatever reason, I didn't clock that Kurisu was Senri until the exact moment that they wanted me to clock it. It all falls into place with such a satisfying click, because like Takeru, the game has done such a fantastic job of dangling the truth just out of our reach, and making us want to believe in Kurisu's deception as much as he does. This is in many ways the emotional core of the whole game. Senri's deception is heartbreaking because of her desire to live a normal, happy life. How can we begrudge her for that, even if the approach she took was wrong? The delusion she lives by is a coping mechanism for trauma just as strong as Takeru's delusion of his childhood friend Serica, whom he subconsciously created in order to affirm his own existence. Senri's first appearance as her real self made me cheer out loud, literally cheer, and the confrontation that follows is just emotional gut punch after emotional gut punch. Serica's death is a beautiful but tragic ending to her story, one that in hindsight, I really wish they stuck to, this or the common route ending, and the image of Senri and Takeru standing before Nono's grave, mourning someone they knew but in some ways never knew at all, is going to haunt me for a while. If Chaos Child had ended at Kurisu's route, or Senri's, I should probably say, I would have been a very satisfied reader. Unfortunately, it doesn't, and although I have several issues with this visual novel's true ending, this section is reserved for plot twists, so at first I'll only address the Chaos Child Syndrome reveal. There's no other way of saying this. I really don't like this twist. And no, not just because of how convoluted it makes things. I also think it's completely unnecessary. There are 4 major reasons why I don't like the Chaos Child Syndrome shenanigans. Number 1 is something I've already mentioned, convolution. The hallmark of a good plot twist is inevitability. When a shock arrives, it shouldn't feel tacked on. It should feel like an organic part of the story, something which had to happen. For example, when I found out that Kurisu was Senri, my reaction was as follows. Oh, I can't believe I didn't see that. It felt deserved, not only because of its simplicity, but because of the amount of time they spent setting it up, both plot-wise and character-wise. When I found out about the full nature of the Chaos Child Syndrome, my reaction wasn't, oh, I can't believe I didn't see that. It was, what? The twist felt random. It felt out of left field. The sheer impracticality of it all is the biggest offender here. Maybe I'm too cynical about human nature, but in my opinion there is no way that the general public would tolerate letting these Chaos Child Syndrome patients essentially run free. There would be major protests, both for and against. There would just be way too much obstruction in the patients' supposed normal lives for this to be possible, and not only that, we would have seen way more evidence of it in the common route. These people are supposedly under a synchro delusion which stops them from seeing cracks in their collective reality, but this very concept undermines the twist, because it prevents the story from giving you enough tangible evidence for the story's existence. Keeping the Chaos Child Syndrome patients in the dark is the point, but keeping the reader in the dark too isn't good writing. It's cheating. This leads me into the second big reason why I don't like this idea. Number 2. Lack of adequate setup. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there aren't any hints at all in the common route towards this twist. The game obviously intends Kunisato's treatment of Takeru and Arumura to be the biggest red flag, but I'm sorry, the hints that do exist are nowhere near sufficient enough to justify such a massive twist. They would have needed to have a lot more incidents of people looking at the main character strangely in public, or treating them in a different way to everyone else, for this twist not to feel like the story overreaching itself. Beyond the sheer what the fuck quality of it all, the syndrome also undermines something else in the narrative, the antagonists. Here we arrive at the third biggest reason. Number 3. It makes the committee look incompetent. Admittedly, this is a problem I have with the committee throughout both visual novels, but it's never more prominent than with the Chaos Child Syndrome reveal. The committee is supposed to be a deep state organisation, the Illuminati, in other words, that attempts to run things from a place of secrecy. We know from the common route that the committee weren't happy with the disruption of the Shibuya earthquake and the amount of attention that this and the Chaos Child outbreak brought. If secrecy is so important to their agenda, why on earth would they let these Chaos Child patients be visible to the public? In the true ending, we see the amount of attention they naturally draw with the way tourists take pictures of them. You cannot tell me that the existence of these people wouldn't be national, probably even global news. Not even the committee would be that good at suppressing information. The tourists and the public would post and share pictures, spoken word would spread, there would be a scandal, and it would leak. Furthermore, the game shows a bulletin about the syndrome displayed in the middle of Shibuya. They're not even bothering to try and suppress the information. In light of this, why the hell wouldn't the committee just lock these patients away in a basement somewhere, like they did with the Gigalomaniacs and Chaos Head? Even if they want to carry out a New World Order thought experiment, there's no justifying the potential risk of doing it in the public eye, when they obviously have the resources to do it in secret. Something that annoys me about the committee in general is their insistence on letting individuals like Wakui carry things out, rather than just handling the situation as a group. At best, it makes them look overconfident. At worst, like with this twist, it makes them look incompetent. Number 4. Thematic repetition. Despite all my other complaints with the twist, this is the one I find most egregious. The best way I can explain this is through an analogy. Let's imagine that Chaos Child is a 10,000 word essay. The author has done a pretty good job of explaining their points up till now. They've written 9,500 words and have 500 words left to write a conclusion. They then proceed to not only write a conclusion, but take a permanent marker pen and aggressively underline all of the points they made in the main body of the essay. This is what I mean when I say that the twist plays out as thematic repetition. What does the Chaos Child syndrome tell us about being a wrong-sider, about delusions and reality, about trauma and coping mechanisms, that we don't already know? Nothing. The common and heroine routes have already made these points in a more subtle, more emotionally effective, and generally better way. There's nothing in the Chaos Child twist or the true ending as powerful as Takeru's realization that he never once understood the childhood friend who had been beside him his whole life. There's nothing here as sad as the discovery that Kurisu Nono isn't Kurisu Nono. All this reveal does is make things more complicated than they need to be, while retreading thematic ground that we've already treaded. The twist takes the game and the series as far away from reality as it's ever been, seriously challenging the reader's suspension of disbelief, even in a game where characters have psychic powers. I'm willing to admit that every reader has their own bullshit quotient, and that some people may have a higher tolerance for this kind of stuff than me, which is fine. All I can say is that for yours truly, this was one surprise too many, and far exceeded my own personal bullshit quotient. Chaos Head had some twists that didn't work as well as the creators hoped they would, but it didn't have anything as unnecessary and downright irritating as this one. For me, this is an element that the first game in the series definitely handled better. One of my biggest takeaways after completing Chaos Head was that the antagonists of the game were some of its biggest flaws. I've already touched on the committee's complete inability to deal with situations properly despite their supposed influence, and this is also a problem I felt in the first game. These visual novels never explain how much power the committee really has, which often makes their role in the narrative feel confused and inconsistent. Furthermore, it's difficult to make a shadowy organisation like this very compelling, especially since we don't meet many people involved in the committee, but also because of the relative cartoonishness of their world domination through mind control schemes. The games try to solve this by having singular characters that embody the committee in each game. Norase Genichi plays this role in Chaos Head, while Wakui and to a certain extent Sakuma play the role in Chaos Child. For me, Norase Genichi was not a very effective villain. At his core, he's just a two-dimensional evil scientist. The black clothes and exaggerated sword all combine to make him as chucklesome as he is menacing. Chaos Head also puts little to no effort into developing the detective and nurse villains. They don't have much personality beyond fanatic cultists. The image of Shogun and the creepy sound of his wheelchair instilled more fear in my heart than either of the story's three actual villains. Moving on to Chaos Child, the creators made a concerted effort to tie the antagonist into Takeru's life and backstory, which was an excellent change. Serika might not be an antagonist in the purest sense, but she still manages to be the best villain in the series, particularly in the common and Kurisu routes. Sakuma's cold sociopathy led to a fantastic showdown with Takeru. I enjoyed his character a lot, even if they never really explained why he waited so long after setting up Alba Dormitory to experiment on his adoptive son. In addition, I found Wakui more charismatic and frightening than Norase, even if he still didn't have a huge amount of character depth. The takeaway that the Chaos games don't have very effective villains is a fair one overall, even if they made some strides to improve this in Chaos Child. Characters who don't prove to be pure villains, like Sarika in the original Nishuzo Takumi, end up being much more memorable and impactful than the full-blown ones. Either way, I'll still give the benefit of the doubt to Chaos Child in this respect. Judging from my opinion on the Chaos Child Syndrome twist, you probably already know what I'm going to say here. We'll start off with the first game in the series for consistency. Chaos Head's true ending is one of the strongest parts of the narrative, and still packs a powerful punch almost 20 years after its release. The change from the common route to the true ending works because of the careful repetition of the game's opening scene. Every time you start a new playthrough, you see the sequence of Takumi lying in the ruins of Shibuya, where Rimi lays a kiss on his lips and then takes his life. The opening of the true route reinforces the change in Takumi's character. The realization that being a delusionary existence does not mean he isn't real in the eyes of those around him. And Rimi's further realization that she can't kill Takumi is the ultimate way of affirming this. The whole game is structured around finally reaching the true ending, finally revealing that blue sky, and when it appears on the title screen, you feel the weight of all that waiting, all the pain that it took to reach, just as much as the characters themselves. It's a fantastic moment, and though visual novels often pull tricks like this, such as in If My Heart Had Wings or Muv-Luv Alternative, the title screen change at the end of Chaos Head feels transcendent. The game couldn't have ended any other way, and left me not only satisfied, but almost apprehensive of Chaos Child. I found myself thinking that the thematic sequel had a huge task in making a game as fulfilling as its predecessor. It's a shame, because right up until the true ending of Chaos Child, I'd been prepared to say that they'd somehow succeeded in this task. Still, the Silent Sky route is about more than just the twist. We also have the conclusion to Takeru and Sarika's journey, which has some highlights, but also its own fair share of frustrations. I understand what they were going for with the ending to their story. The decision to leave on a bittersweet, somewhat ambiguous note is valid, but there's a reason this ending wasn't anywhere near as effective as it could have been. Most of these are about execution. Let's start with the game Taku suggests with Wakui. I haven't got a clue why he or Mio seemed to think this was a good idea, and to be honest, the visual novel introduces this so quickly and explains it so poorly that it's hard to even care about what they're suggesting. Is this really the best solution they could come up with? It feels to me like they're just playing into Wakui's hands, and the abrupt time skip that follows afterwards makes the whole confrontation between Takeru and his once teacher feel incomplete and anticlimactic. Even more frustrating is how Takeru, Mio and Morrissey treat Sarika. Takeru's desire is supposedly to have Sarika live a normal life. It's why he went through all the effort of losing his Gigamaniac powers. What's frustrating here is that he doesn't make enough of an effort to push her away when she meets him again. He tells her an absurd amount of details about his life, even mentioning that he had a best friend, and permits Sarika to investigate the school with him. Sure, this is circumstantial for the plot, but he tells her so much about his life and circumstances that it makes his resolve for her to live a normal life seem half-hearted. He might not have outright told her the truth, but he makes it so bloody obvious that even a child would have been able to connect the dots, and she soon does. If they'd executed this bittersweet parting with a little more thought, I could envision it being really affecting. But with all the issues I've already mentioned with the true ending, it didn't hit even half as hard as it could have done. The one scene that I really liked in the true ending was Sarika's moment in the theatre. This was a lovely callback to the common route, and captured that sad feeling of being awoken to an illusion, unable to go back to blissful ignorance. The rest of it, I really could have done without. Storytelling is like a race. It's not how you start, it's how you finish that matters. You only need to look at Game of Thrones to see how much a bad ending can tarnish a show's legacy. Am I saying that Chaos Child's true ending is as incoherent as that? No, of course not. A lot of fans seem to like this true ending a lot, and don't object to the syndrome twist as much as I do. But when I think about Chaos Child, the first thing I'm likely going to think about is how much I wish the story had ended at Kurisu's route, or perhaps even earlier. A great ending is what takes a book, film or TV show into classic territory in its respective mediums. After Chaos Head's conclusion, I fully understood what made people call this visual novel a classic, in spite of all its flaws. After Chaos Child's conclusion, I had the opposite feeling. The second game in this duology is a more polished title, with a higher peak than its predecessor, but the slower pace and anticlimactic end forces me to see it less as a flawed classic, and more so just flawed. I'm as surprised to say this as anyone else, considering the general consensus, but if you had to ask me which is the superior visual novel, my answer would be Chaos Head Noah every time. That's not to say that I regret playing Chaos Child. This duology was at times a brilliant, soul-searching experience that made me consider my own reality, my own delusions, just as much as Takumi and Takeru. I can't say that either of these crack the list of my favourites, but I understand why the science adventure titles are considered must-plays for fans of this subgenre, and will definitely be giving Robotic Notes and Steins Gate the full playthroughs they deserve. No matter how much the true ending of Chaos Child soured my experience, the best moments of that game will stick with me just as much as Chaos Head. There's so much to analyse here that even after the longest video on my channel, I still feel like I've barely scratched the surface of everything the series has to offer. If you're even half a fan of visual novels, there will be something for you to enjoy in this duology. Whether it's a blue sky finally appearing over Shibuya, or Takeru and Senri standing before the grave of someone close to their hearts, looking towards the future. Thank you for watching.